Welcome back to Season 2 of That's So Second Millennium, the Catholic Science podcast, where we look forward to the new synthesis in the new millennium between faith, philosophy, and science. Welcome to episode 76 of That's So Second Millennium. I'm your sound engineer, Paul Giesting, bringing you part 2 of Bill Schmidt's interview with Megan Levis, graduate student in bioengineering and speaker at the Society of Catholic Scientists Conference this past June at Notre Dame. The conference is at Notre Dame, and Megan is a student at Notre Dame. Convenient. It's always handy when that happens. So, in this interview, they go through further into the philosophic details behind Megan's topic of growing small human brains in the laboratory. And we wade into the further philosophic issues of what does it mean for our own individuality. They also talk a lot about the role that the Society of Catholic Scientists has actually played in allowing her to network and get to know other people in the field, people that she's had very fruitful collaborations with, and her own effort in a lot of different directions to seek a broader community of people interested in faith and ethics and doing her science and engineering in a way that's consistent with those. So it's an intriguing and inspiring interview. We're glad to bring you the second part of it. And with that, I will let them take it away.
Thank you for returning for our continuing conversation. Megan Levis. Thank you. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you again for having me.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah. And we were talking about the talk that you gave at the June's conference held here at Notre Dame of the Society of Catholic Scientists. And you spoke on the title, Created in the Image and Likeness of Man. And that really pinpoints some very interesting moral questions that combine the forefronts of engineering, science, medicine, and religion. And it sounds like you're 5 years as a graduate student of bioengineering, quite busy with all sorts of science and religion kinds of topics. It's kept you busy, huh?
Yeah. Well, I think both of them keep me interested in each other.
That's interesting.
Where they kind of build on each other. And, the more I learn about science, the more questions that I have in terms of how that kind of interfaces with my faith and with faith and philosophy. And then, I'll do a little digging in the faith and philosophy world, maybe attend a talk or read a book. And then I think that goes back in and informs my approach to engineering. So they've definitely kind of been building on each other.
That's great. And quite a contrast to what's too often feared happening, that those two fields are drifting further apart rather than coming together in people's hearts and minds. But we talked about that in the earlier episode. Now, we started talking about your own presentation and how it necessarily, because we're dealing with really the forefront of a lot of bioengineering and stuff that used to be just stuff of science fiction, there's a lot of clunky jargon that might be out there, but it's something, the implications of what's being worked on is something that needs to involve everybody in conversation and awareness. Nothing presents that more than the way you were talking with the scientists and attendees about some fundamental words, personhood and personal identity. How did that fit in with your presentation, which was specifically on organoids as a kind of precursor of a new kind of organism that we're able to create now, or pursuing the creation of?
So those questions of personhood and identity definitely feed back into my talk, of which the talk title which is created in the image and likeness of man. So
Yeah.
I was really asking questions about what do you do with something that was created in the image of man and not in the image of God? And are they different or are they similar? How are they different? How are they similar? Yeah, this is a really big question that I threw out to the group with the talk that I gave. It's a very important question. It's a question that every time I bring it up to someone, and I've had many conversations over the past year about what do we do with organoids, which are multicellular systems built out of brain tissue. What do we do with these brain organoids? Are they similar to a human, similar in the right kinds of ways that they would be meriting moral consideration, or are they dissimilar enough? Can we basically just think of them as 3D cell cultures? Right. Every time I have a conversation with someone about this topic, I get a different insight, a different answer. I think there are so many pieces of this that I am still in the process of trying to piece everything together.
Wow. By the way, what is your own current research focusing on, and how is it related to?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. So this is a side topic that I was interested in that relates to a good amount of my research. So my main project that I've been working on over the past year or so is building devices called microfluidics. So they're very small devices that we can grow things inside of. They can be used for a variety of applications. We just happen to use them for growing cells and small organs. We do a lot of work with fruit flies in our lab. So we grow fruit fly organs in these microfluidic devices. But basically, they're like mini bioreactors, so we're able to keep things alive in them for longer than you could if it was just in kind of static media. So I have been working on this really cool project to make it a lot cheaper and easier to make microfluidics for research.
I see.
So actually, this project is built out of a collaboration with a scientist that I met through the Society of Catholic Scientists. I happened to sit next to Dr. Ontiveros, who is at St. John Fisher College. He was really the first person that developed this technology. He mostly used it in the classroom to introduce his students to different fluid flow problems. He's a biologist, so he put cells inside of them, but is mostly in a teaching position. So we, through this collaboration, really took our method of making microfluidics and brought it into the lab and tested it in the lab and found that we could use it for a couple of neat applications. So one thing that Dr. Ontiveros and I did was we actually got some organoids, not brain organoids, but we have put organoids inside of the devices. But primarily right now, our research has to do with putting fruit fly organs and fruit fly cells and other cell types inside these devices.
Nice. And the key issues that you raised regarding personhood and identity and all, are they exclusive to the brain organoids? And you can explain why. I think it's about personhood.
So, I think when you think of personhood, that leads you into questions regarding the mind and get you into philosophy of the mind territory.
Yeah.
And when we think about personhood and the mind and the body, those questions are a little bit more easily defined if you're talking about, skin tissue, or if you're talking about organs that are not the brain. When you talk about organs or organoids that are similar to the brain, I think it gets a little bit more interesting because we maybe don't have the best understanding of the brain. The brain is an incredibly complex organ. And, going from a thought all the way down to a synapse, there are a couple of levels of connection that haven't quite been mapped. So within that, I think our understanding of ourselves particularly when it comes to ourselves insofar as we think of, the way that our brain works, and the way that we have ideas. I think those are really fascinating questions. And they're, particularly fascinating when you're thinking about something that maybe like looks a little bit like the brain, but isn't quite a brain.
So we are not even completely clear as human beings about the connection between the brain and our mind and our personhood, right? And didn't you say that there's a general principle among bioethicists that it's the capacity for rational thought that is kind of the benchmark for whether certain responsibilities to the dignity of an organism, a person, kick in? Is that right? That's a lot of stuff to conjure.
Yeah, this definitely gets out of my, engineering wheelhouse, where I spend a lot of time talking about materials and cells and things like that. But so this definitely gets us into the philosophy of the mind territory, which is something that I specifically stayed away from in my talk because that is not my expertise. And there are many different theories of the mind and kind of the mind-brain connection. I will clarify in terms of personhood. It seems like there are a couple of different components to that. So it's not just about the brain, and I think it's important to note that the person is not just reducible to their brain.
Indeed.
People are kind of these complex creatures where we have many, many different parts. I guess the thing that I wanted to poke at in this talk is that it seems like the brain is a part that is maybe not as disposable as, say, a hand or another organ. There are transplants of various heart transplants, lung transplants, but a brain transplant seems to be getting us into a different territory. And I think that has to do with questions relating to personal identity and kind of where the person is if you do something like a brain transplant.
Yes, but it also struck me that the idea of identity is something that is, in a sense, a function of the brain or the mind. I might be mixing those up in this case, but especially, I don't want to get into the hottest topics of cultural, but one of the questions is, what is human identity? What is a person's identity? And is there a sense in which a person can create their own identity to some degree? And obviously, that's not bioengineering.
That's a really big question. So what I was thinking about and what I brought in with this talk was individual identity. So that was building off of some work by a Catholic bioethicist. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was the one who kind of posed this question of identity when we're thinking about organs that are particular to the person. With philosophy of the mind, there are a lot of people who are asking questions of where do you as a person reside within your body. And that's a huge question. I think my experience, both kind of as a Catholic and as a bioengineer, is that we, in and of ourselves, are integrated into our body. So I think that's an important point to be made, the fact that, okay, yes, you can have something like a heart transplant or a lung transplant, but at the end of the day, most of our experiences are experiences that we have through our body. And there's this very powerful connection between our brain, our mind, and our body. And so I think trying to tease those particular things apart from each other kind of in a sense is like very, very hard to do. But yeah, these are like really heavy questions.
Yeah.
But I think they're interesting because I think all of us kind of have this within ourselves of wanting to know kind of what makes us individual and kind of how do we work. I think that's a question that I've always been fascinated with as a bioengineer. I think philosophers answer this from a different perspective, but from the bioengineering perspective, like how do we work? How do our cells communicate? A good amount of the research that I have to do has to do with asking questions of kind of how does a cell, over here in this part of the organ, know to be over here and not to be on the other side of the organ, and kind of how do the shapes of our organs grow and develop.
My gosh.
So
yeah,
there are like tons of different ways in which you can ask this question of kind of like what makes us tick and how do we work. And this is just kind of asking it from this interesting perspective where we're abstracting some of the essential pieces of what it means to be human away from itself.
Yeah. And you're asking good, meaningful questions about the integration of it all and the integrity of the human being and of the organism. Whereas some might say that we all love and need engineers. Thank goodness for them.
Yeah.
But I think maybe a layperson's stereotype of engineering is sometimes that they're masters of making, focusing on the separate parts of everything, and making everything fit, and making everything work, and solving the problems thereby. But is that a kind of natural conflict that someone like you, who's studying engineering, but from a Catholic perspective, has to, in a sense, struggle with? That being integrative and separating so for functional reasons?
So I think maybe I'll refer you to Walker Percy on this one.
So Walker Percy, great.
Yeah, he is a great author, one of my favorites, and in his book Lost in the Cosmos, he talks a lot about how in the sort of cultural soup in which we live this day, we're always going to exist in some sort of tension. Being a human being is not a very comfortable process. Things are constantly changing and moving, and it's transient. It doesn't last forever. So I think Walker Percy has it right, where we are called to kind of exist in this tension, and we have to kind of exist in this tension of two different things that might seem like they're good, or they might seem like they're the right answer. But life is not so easily reducible to kind of a particular saying or kind of this simple answer. It's definitely a tricky thing, and I think Walker Percy has it right.
I like it. Boy, it's nice to know that the truth resides not only in science, but in literature and in all of the...
Oh, absolutely. I will say I'm the biggest supporter of literature and art. I think that this is something that you pointed to a little bit, was that we tend to look to science for kind of answers to the big questions.
Yeah.
But I think that literature and art, and I will say literature in particular, allows us to engage with truth in a way where we maybe don't have these predispositions or presuppositions when we approach it. And I think reading any sort of novel does a really good job of revealing to you truths both about yourself and about the world around you. Kind of in an unexpected way sometimes, where the truth will just sort of like sneak up on you. And I think great literature does that.
That's great, yeah. And now you're making me realize how appropriate it was that our dinner speaker at the Society of Catholic Scientists was indeed a writer. right?
Yes.
I guess a Hugo Award-winning science fiction
Yes.
writer. And so the truth must come forth from all fields.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we had a science fiction writer because actually in my physics class in high school, we watched, I think it was this movie that was talking about how a lot of great advances in technology actually have come out of science fiction. And a lot of great scientists and engineers are inspired, I think is a great word to use there, inspired by science fiction. And I think that ability to like wonder about the world is definitely a gift that is transmitted sometimes through engineering, but also sometimes through literature and art.
Indeed, yeah. And I guess I should ask about the society itself in terms of whether you find that a useful portal to that broader realm of knowledge, because you are indeed an enrolled, registered graduate student member of the society, right?
Yeah. So I've been a member almost since the beginning. I was at the first annual meeting for the Society of Catholic Scientists, and I mentioned that one of the collaborations that has been incredibly successful, we've had Professor Ontiveros here at Notre Dame 2 summers in a row, visiting and working and conducting research in the lab, and so far we've had 2 papers that we've submitted through that collaboration, and that just happened through Dr. Ontiveros and I sitting next to each other at the first conference.
That's so cool.
And just striking up a conversation about research. So I think it's a great community, and has already been incredibly helpful, both in giving me the opportunity to spend time thinking deeply about questions that relate to both faith and science in the way that I was able to do with this talk. Where I had an opportunity to just kind of sit with the topic and think about it. I actually thought about it for a whole year before giving this talk. And also, forming those research connections. So there have been multiple good things coming out of that. I also, this past summer, was at a conference with Dr. Barr, the president. He gave a conference at Providence College through Lumen Christi.
Oh, right.
That was on modern science and ancient faith.
I think that's the name of his book. Yeah. Chris Baglow's book.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
It was a Catholicism and science conference through Lumen Christi. That was led by it was led by Dr. Barr and Father Nicanor Austriaco.
Oh, whom we interviewed. Well, he's an amazing person too.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah, but it was an amazing opportunity to get to spend a whole week with a set of other Catholic graduate students up at Providence College, hearing both about Father Nicanor's approach to faith and science, and also Dr. Barr's approach to faith and science. And it was a small group, so we got to kind of have a good community of graduate students, and also get to learn from 2 great Society of Catholic Scientists members.
That's great, yes. So in addition to the obvious fact that the Society of Catholic Scientists can help young engineers and scientists and philosophers of science, etc., really deepen that integrity of religion and scientific and engineering pursuit. As speaking as a graduate student, speaking as a future member of the engineering profession, would there be any other suggestions that you would have for folks like yourself who want to advance in the field in every way, as you so meaningfully have, but also to keep in mind these values questions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that definitely my advice would be to start small, in your own community. I think the way in which we build a culture is through friendships and good connection. that's something that I have loved about Notre Dame, is being plugged into a couple of different Catholic communities and having the opportunity to, sit in Starbucks across the street and have amazing conversations about philosophy or political science, or about brain organoids. So definitely
that would take some espresso, wouldn't it?
Well, we all know the token drink of graduate students is dark coffee.
Right, and plenty of it.
Yeah, that's so true. But then also just keeping an eye out for different opportunities. So I know the Center for Ethics and Culture here at Notre Dame has opportunities and conferences and lectures where students at Notre Dame or students from out of town can come in and hear great speakers. I've been very fortunate to have an incredibly supportive advisor, so I've been able to have conversations with him, and he's also been able to connect me with different ways in which I can kind of engage in the ethical side of bioengineering.
Oh, that's great.
And then there are a number of great centers across the country. Not every year do they always have a faith and science conference, but like the Lumen Christi one that I mentioned. There's also Collegium Institute sometimes has conferences for both undergraduates and graduate students. So I would just say the path maybe isn't as clear for a science or engineering student who has these interests as it might be for a humanities student. But I think just keep your eyes open, and my approach has been to have as many conversations with as many people will listen about this. And usually it's some loose connection where someone will connect you with another person that maybe will have a different approach or different resources for you. So
that's neat.
The personal connection is, very important.
I've called the Holy Spirit kind of the great networker.
Absolutely.
Am I right? And so much can be accomplished just by plugging into communities.
And I will say, like, for students to not feel rushed into any to having to do kind of everything all at once. I think the time that it takes to go through these things and to maybe the time that it takes to be connected with a community like the Society for Catholic Scientists or a community of like-minded graduate students, sometimes it does take a couple of years, and that's not a bad thing. And I think, at least for me, it has made me much more appreciative of the time that I have had to wait before getting plugged into a community like the one that I have here.
Yeah, but it's paying off. That should be my last question. Then, it's not meant as an interview question. Where would you see yourself in 10 years, or within 20 years? Or,
oh wow!
Do you have any particular aspirations?
Yeah, that's a really big question. A question that more and more people are asking me now that I'm getting to the end of grad school.
Yes. You just defended your thesis, right?
My thesis proposal.
Your thesis proposal.
Yes.
Great.
So I proposed it, and now I have to write the thing.
Oh, darn.
But I don't totally know how to answer that question. I think that my career will probably be a little bit of a charting my own course, kind of entering into things as the doors open. I don't think that it's going to necessarily be a traditional kind of trajectory. Mm-hmm. I think that my approach until now has just been to do things that I'm interested in.
Right on.
And I think they lead to things that you're more interested in. And I think when you're truly interested in your topic, you engage with it in a way that you do better work than you would if you were just trying to fill your resume.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. And engaging with similarly passionate people through those networks you were discussing is going to help discernment all along into the future. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Megan. Very good to talk with you, and all the very best of knowledge growth and blessings growth in your own career.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
Thank you very much.
If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. You can email a link to this episode at thatsosecondmillennium.net, share the post for this episode from our Facebook page, or you can use your podcast app's built-in sharing feature.